Before taking a seat in the House of Commons, a newly elected Member of Parliament must swear an oath or make a solemn affirmation of allegiance to the Queen. For some, and in particular for Sinn Féin MPs, this is a problem. They're not happy to state that they will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors. They're not happy with that idea. Even in a constitutional monarchy, where the powers of the monarch are comparatively limited. Leadership, whether by kings, tsars, pharaohs, presidents or prime ministers, is key to any country. But Jesus has a message that is even more important than any human kingship. The message he has is about the kingdom of God. Many of the parables that he tells are about the kingdom of God. The idea may seem a fairly abstract concept. What is the kingdom of God? We can't get our heads around it. But as we read Luke's gospel, it's a bit like putting together a jigsaw. And Luke keeps giving us new pieces of the jigsaw to help us put together a picture of what Jesus means by kingdom of God. Jesus says the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. Like it's small and insignificant, but grows massively and becomes really significant. Or he says the kingdom of God is not something that can be observed, nor will people say, here it is or there it is, because the kingdom of God is in your midst. And again, Jesus says, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. Or how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. And if you listened to Saturday's reflection, you would have heard this. Jesus went on to tell them a parable because he was near Jerusalem and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. And the parable is a story about a nobleman who is appointed king, but some people rejected his kingship. And even one of his servants effectively rejected his kingship by ignoring his instruction to invest the money he was given. Well, as we piece together all the pieces of the jigsaw, we begin to understand that the kingdom of God is the realm where Jesus is recognized as king. The realm where Jesus is recognized as king. And in today's passage, we're left in no doubt about Jesus' claim to be God's anointed king. Let me read Luke's Gospel, chapter 19, verses 28 to 40. After Jesus had said this, that's the parable about the king, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you untying it? Say, the Lord needs it. Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he'd told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owners asked, why are you untying the colt? They replied, the Lord needs it. They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. And as he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down to the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they'd seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. I tell you, he replied, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. Imagine for a minute someone from 2,000 years in the future discovers what is for them a 2,000-year-old video recording. And in this video, they see a big white vehicle stop outside a building which they recognize to be a church. And this big white vehicle has white ribbons attached to it, between the doors and the radiator grill. And inside the car, they see a nervous young woman dressed in a white dress. And this person from 2,000 years in the future thinks, what's going on? Is it a ritual sacrifice? Well, the answer to us, of course, is obvious. We know what the smart white car and the white ribbons mean. It's a bride arriving for a wedding. The special car arriving at church has a special significance. But for the man 2,000 years in the future, the significance may be a bit less clear. Well, similarly for us, it may be less clear why Jesus approaches Jerusalem on a young donkey. We may not at first understand what it means. But for the people of that time, it has special significance. And Jesus definitely wants to approach Jerusalem riding on a donkey. And we understand what the significance is from a passage in the Old Testament that speaks of a king arriving at Jerusalem on a young donkey, arriving to rescue his people. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. That's Zechariah 9:9. So Jesus is effectively saying, by acting out this riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, I am the king, arriving at my capital city. But what sort of king is he? Our passage today gives a piece of that picture. Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, deliberately alluding to that passage in Zechariah, where the king is not only triumphant and victorious, but also humble and riding on a donkey. Jesus is pointing to the humility of his kingship. And as we read on in Luke's Gospel, we get further pieces of that picture as we begin to realize that the Messiah is not a military king, but a servant king, a king who suffered to bring us forgiveness. That's not, of course, to underplay the king's authority. Jesus has strong words of warning to those who continue to reject him as king. But we do see a king who is unlike any human king, a king to whom we can give allegiance without fear, knowing that he wants the best for us. And the message of this passage for today is simply that Jesus is still king. And if our lives are like many kingdoms, we may like to think of ourselves as king of our own life. But ultimately, Jesus is the rightful king. And the question every one of us has to ask is, do I accept him as the rightful king over my life? Just as every MP has to declare to be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Queen and her successors before they can take their seat in Parliament. To accept Jesus, we need to be part of the kingdom of God, to accept Jesus as our forgiving rescuer king. That means recognize that our lives are not our own to live as we please. It means being forgiven for refusing him his rightful place, and then accepting him as king. That means perhaps relearning how to live every area of our life in a way that pleases and serves him. How to use our time to serve him, how to handle our money to serve Jesus as king, how to live as an ambassador to Jesus our king. Here's a question. Is there an area of my life which I know I'm not submitting to Jesus as king? Is there some area of disobedience where I'm telling myself, I can have Jesus as king, but I can ignore him in this area of my life? If so, I need to hear the old challenge. If Jesus is not king of all, he's not king at all. Now, King of all doesn't mean we're living perfectly for Jesus in all areas, but it does mean that we're aiming to serve Jesus in all areas and submitting to him in all areas, however hard that may be. He is the King who wants the best for us. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you that you are the King who wants the best for our lives. We ask that you would give us the strength to bear faithful and true allegiance to you. Amen.